Hey guys, and welcome to episode 162 of Meeple to People. Today, we're exploring the issue of sustainability in the tabletop gaming world, from plastic miniatures and shrink wrap to global shipping routes and manufacturing materials. The hobby we cherish has a footprint, but it also has enormous potential for innovation and positive change. As more publishers, designers, and gamers ask, how can we make games greener without sacrificing creativity? Quality. A new chapter in board gaming is unfolding before our very eyes. And joining me to dig into this intersection of environment, ecology, and entertainment is someone who's been working on these issues from multiple angles, Julie Bierwirth. Julie has built her career at the crossroads of gaming and environmental responsibility. She is currently the chair of the Committee on Sustainability with Gamma. She's a collaborator behind the second edition of the Green Games Guide, and she's owner, illustrator at Distant Rabbit Games. So it is clear that she's got a resume that indicates she knows what she's talking about. And I'm happy to be talking with her today. Julie, thanks for joining. How are you?
I'm doing great, PJ. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
Abs- I'm great. I'm really excited because this is a topic that I'm really thrilled to talk about and have you on. I've said this multiple times, there's issues that are really important to this industry and to me, but I'm not an expert on them. And so finding experts to come on the show, I'm really thrilled to learn about you and have you on. So again,
Well,
I
thank you so
can't thank
much.
you
Yeah,
enough.
I've been very fortunate, sort of like what you're talking about. I've been very fortunate to work with people who are experts within this industry from lots of different angles, people who are doing the manufacturing end, people who do, footprint analysis, like actually calculating these things. I'm more sort of the collator of all of that information. And trying to, connect the right people with the right opportunities. But I feel like I've learned a lot along the way, and it's mostly just that there are a few things that will motivate me quite as well as sustainability will.
You're the perfect guest to have on to talk about this. But before we want to get into it, I wanted to ask you, what was the first board game that you ever played that got you in the mud?
It's gonna be the classic answers. The Resistance was up there. Catan was up
A
there.
ton. Yep.
And I can't even tell you which one came first. And also Munchkin. These were the ones that friends introduced me to back. I know Munchkin's
Yeah.
a throwback. Like I feel like Munchkin has fallen out of the gateway game
Yes.
in favor of other things. But in my day, that was a big gateway game
You are
back in the
you
Stone
are
Age.
in you're definitely in safe hands here, because those are some of my similar beginning games as well. No one has mentioned Munchkin. I've virtually forgot about it till you just mentioned it. I'm
I
like,
know I have not played it in so many
wow.
years.
Oh my
Yeah, that
gosh.
one was at the time that I feel like
Yeah.
I knew a lot of people who played it, and I got introduced to it probably around the same time as Catan. I think even Resistance was a little bit later. But yeah, those were
Yeah.
my first.
So that's an interesting trio. I want to unpack that for a minute, right? So you've got Catan, which is the quintessential Euro game that comes over to the US and the Western world in the mid 90s. And then you've got the Resistance, which is social deduction, bluffing, things of that nature. And then there's Munchkin, which at its core is a simple card game, but is, that whole, I think what people don't like about it, or why they don't play it as often, is that kingmaker kind of at
Mhm.
the
Yep.
ending, right? It's like whoever
Yeah.
gets closest to the 10th point, we just gang up on them, and
Yep.
then Julie comes in for the win.
Yep.
So after having said all that, what was it that, if you'll pardon the pun, sustained your interest in the hobby?
It was two things, and it was so all of those things were introduced to me by various friends in various circles. And they just sort of felt like, they came about naturally. I'd be at a friend's house and they'd say, "Hey, I have this game that I really want to introduce you to." That all felt very natural. It was when my husband and I first got together. He had grown up playing lots of games, and he had young children, and so we started a lot of the games, Sleeping Queens, a lot of the games that are accessible for kids. We played them all the time. I mean, the amount of games that we played with our kids when they were young was incredible. we both have a university schedule most of the year, and our kids have a school schedule. And so during the summers, what do we have to do all day except play games with our kids? So that was a little bit of the beginning of it. But then, they would go to bed and we'd want something that we could do just the two of us. And so we started finding ones that were going to be good for when we were together, some when we were long distance that we could play online. That's how we got into Splendor, was playing on the
Sure.
app
Yep. Yep.
together. That was another big gateway one for us, for our like two-player. Hanabi was another big one for
Yeah.
two. And then we started kind of bridging that gap into like terraforming Mars and, things that were going to be heavier. But the big thing that we never found, we both really loved the Resistance. That was kind of a hands down classic, and especially for the player psychology aspect of it. None of the Euro games ever touched for us what was like, emotional and evocative. And so seeking out more hidden role and betrayal experiences was sort of how we kept pushing forward until we started publishing games.
Interesting. Interesting. So what about the step from being a gamer to a publisher? What was your motivation for starting your company and designing board games?
No, it was just 100% an accident. It was literally the most an accident it can ever be when you publish a game. It was my husband was in the midst of a very stressful first semester. And he was untenured his first semester teaching as a professor,
Okay.
and whenever he encounters that kind of intense stress, he has these bursts of creativity, that's sort of like
Mm.
a coping mechanism,
Yep.
basically. And he had this idea of, what if we could do a hidden role game for two players? There was no thought, zero thought to publishing anything. We didn't know anybody who published. We didn't know that you could even, we thought this was like this is how unaware we were. We knew about Catan and Munchkin, we knew about all those things, but they seemed so distant to us that we were like, well, if we were to publish a game, we would have to bring it to like Parker Brothers. Like, this is how far outside of the indie, we like, in our mind there were like, four different companies that you could go to publish something. In the meantime, there's this whole gigantic, indie hobby industry.
Whole. Yeah.
Yeah, that we had no idea about. We didn't even know Kickstarter existed. And so we were like, well, we could make something that you and I could play together. And so I was away at the time, and he made this whole thorough two-player hidden role game, which had never been done before. We didn't know this, but nobody had ever really kind of cracked the two-player hidden role code. And but we wanted something we could play after our kids went to bed, where we wouldn't have to have a million friends over to play something hidden role. And I played it with him, and I was like, wow, this is hands down the best game I've ever played. And still, we didn't think about publishing it. We had got one of those keepsake Zazzle boxes where you like get,
Yes.
like a like picture of your family on the front of it,
Yep.
and we call it the Game of Trust. Put the thing on the front of it. We kept all like got some cards printed, but that was the extent of it. For 4 years, we just played it, the two of us, and that was all it was ever going to be.
Wow.
Was just something for us to play together. And then it was actually just a complete accident that a friend of a friend, person I worked for at the time, knew some folks at Keymaster Games who had just done their first Kickstarter. And we're
Okay.
like, oh, you can actually publish things. You have this whole game that you designed with your husband. You could actually make that yourself. And so they kind of took us under their wing and led us through the whole how you go to conventions and indie publish a game and
Hmm.
run a Kickstarter and all of that. So it was just, we just made a game for us, and with no intention at all of marketing it. And then it just all kind of fell in our lap.
Wow. 4 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It was every night for 4 years, sometimes two games a night. And it runs for about an hour, hour and a half per game. So yeah, no, it was all we wanted to do with each other.
That's
So
great.
yeah.
That is that is a great story. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is amazing. I really enjoy that. So let me ask you, what sparked your interest in sustainability as an
Mm.
overarching topic? And follow-up is, how did it eventually intersect with your career in the board gaming world specifically?
Yeah, so sustainability, it's always been my husband and I both went to school, master's, PhD, like did the whole track, and it's always been a concern, a part of our thought process. But it I would say the real thing that kind of kicked that into overdrive for us was actually my husband's sister was actually very sustainably minded, like diligent in every possible way about what she was doing, her footprint and all of that. And during our shortly after our Kickstarter for our first game, we'd already decided we wanted to go carbon neutral and we wanted to, think about it sustainably, do a small box game and all of that kind of stuff. But, shortly after our Kickstarter, she was in a fatal car accident. And I think for me, for both of us, a part of our kind of increasing commitment to sustainability has been a little bit of like a honoring what she would have wanted, to not create things thoughtlessly or needlessly.
Sure.
And that if you're going to create, that you create it artistically with intention, that it's a contribution, an artistic contribution that you feel like needs to be in the world, not just a, consumer item,
Right.
and that it's the best that it can be reasonably. I mean, even she would understand there are limits. You're going to run a company, you can't bankrupt your company. You can't, not be able to pay your bills,
Sure.
to be able to be sustainable. But there are a lot of decisions, and that was what we realized as we were going through. There are a lot of decisions that can be made that aren't unsustainable, that are like unsustainable from a financial perspective or from a
Sure.
company perspective, right? Like there
Yeah.
are things you can do that are inexpensive or no cost at all to improve that footprint. And so that's where we've been spending a lot of our time lately.
Well, extend my condolences, but a great way to keep her memory alive. Yeah, that's just an inspiring story. Thank you for that. I guess so. So now how many games have you guys published now on your?
We actually our first one, Mantis Falls, has been so great for us that we've got 4 more in the queue, but we've been
Okay.
supporting that one and kind of building all of the infrastructure around it for the last 4 years.
Mm,
So it sells as well today as it did back when we launched it, and, it means that this is now the majority of my work is working for Distant Rabbit. I still teach some, but, I'm stepping back more and more from that, and, yeah, that's so our next one is a sequel, standalone
okay.
sequel to Mantis Falls.
Is it
So
also
we've
going to
got
be a? Is it also going to be a two-player?
it's 2 to 4.
2 to 4.
Mantis Falls was 2 to 3, so we did expand it to 3
Okay.
eventually, specifically when our son got really interested in playing. It's all a big
I'm
family affair.
noticing a pattern. The children
Yeah,
seem to be
they are a big part of our
driving
life.
the.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what does, based on this experience, what does sustainability actually look like currently in the board gaming world?
You mean like how many people are sustainable or
From
what
a
are the
from a like, what does it look like from the publisher and manufacturer side, right? That, most of the listeners are either content creators or they're just basic gamers who
Mhm.
don't know what it looks like behind the scene.
Yeah. So once a game is finished, I mean, we'll talk about from the design end too. There's sustainability that can come in from the design end. And I actually just did a talk for the Tabletop Game Designers Association talking about what designers specifically can be doing to, even at the beginning of their process, to start thinking about moving in a better direction. However, the majority of the work is on the publisher and the manufacturer, and by extension on the consumer, right, to support those types of companies. After a game is designed and play tested, one of the biggest projects that a publisher does is production, and that is what are the components going to look like? How big are they? What materials are they made from? What does all of this in the end actually end up looking like as a product on a table? And from that perspective, there are a lot of decisions to be made. So it's going to mean everything from could you do this with less components to are you choosing cardboard? Are you choosing wood? Are you choosing plastics? How big is the box going to be? What type of insert are you using? How big is that insert? What material is it made out of? There's so many different aspects that are going to go into that production decision. And that is a relationship between the manufacturer to be informing those decisions, like what is actually possible. And it's also a responsibility of the publisher to ask those questions of what can you make this out of? One of the things I think that a lot of consumers don't know is that because a lot of the board games are made in China, which we can get into, why that is
Sure.
and how we can if we can get around that and all of that. That's been a big topic of discussion, especially since tariffs began. But what often ends up happening when your games are not made in the same country where you are is that there's either a language barrier or just a general communication gap of it's not like we get to go to that facility and actually look through all the materials. They'll send us sample packs, but we don't always know everything that a manufacturer can do and can offer. And it's usually not in a manufacturer's best interest to actually list all of those things because it's a lot of work. And the
Right.
likely thing is that you're going to say, I want all of the standard stuff, basically. And so it's a waste of their time. And so we get in this kind of weird dance where the manufacturer um, says, what do you want? And then you just list all the things that are generally standard usually, or you come up with a really interesting visual solution for something in your game and you tell the manufacturer what you want. They are not usually saying, here is everything that we have to offer. They're usually saying, what do
Okay.
you want? And then you don't
Okay.
know to ask for the things that
Mm,
they've innovated for sustainability or that they could offer. Like
sure.
the vast majority of we quoted with a half dozen manufacturers, not a single one of them ever volunteered to tell us that they had FSC mixed recycled paper. Not one. They all had it, but they didn't tell us.
Wow.
And so how would we make that decision if we weren't forward thinking about
Right.
it? And so that's
Right.
that's the thing that I think a lot of customers don't know how much of a black box that sometimes is for us as publishers. And so it now requires publishers to be more forthright, asking what's available. It requires manufacturers to be more forthright with what they have. And that's part of what our job is with sustainability, is to let people know that they can be asking these questions and that they should be.
Right. So let me ask, because you kind of mentioned it for a minute. So I think no matter where you are on wherever you stand on tariffs, like your personal opinion, I
Mhm.
think I think based on I mean, I am a historian and an archivist, so I think I can unpack what's going on. The end goal of the current administration with tariffs motivated in bringing manufacturing to the US, right?
Yes,
So let's talk about how,
presumably.
yeah, right.
Presumably.
How realistic is that
Not.
for
It's not.
us? Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that I like it, the expense difference between the US and China is so big that the US makes sense for certain types of products. Like if you're just doing a pack of cards, that's a great product for the United States. But for anything that's more complex than that, it can often be very challenging to do it in the US. And now I know some incredible US manufacturers that people should talk to if they're interested in making things local. And there are some great benefits to making things in the US, including that, you don't have all of that freight time, things on
Right.
the seas, and you don't have to worry about imports. And there's definitely a lot that makes it worthwhile. However, I would liken it to saying, you could make cars in Detroit or you could make cars in Manhattan. And is it really worth trying to bring car manufacturing back to Manhattan? Like Manhattan's cost of living is so high that you would have to pay those workers just for them to have an even keel with the people in Detroit on in terms of living wage. You would have to pay them so astronomically much, and then you wouldn't have as much space and all of that. Um, I would say that in some ways abroad versus the United States issue is a little bit like that one, where our cost of living here is just so high that, what a worker in another country will be paid to make your game, it might seem like it's a very fraught subject for sure. But often, if you were to bring that back to the United States, the worker in the United States is going to have a lower quality of life, is going to have a harder time affording basic necessities on that kind of salary than the worker who is in China or Indonesia.
Right.
And so it just requires so much more. And in order to be even close to competitive on cost, sometimes it means that those workers are getting paid less relative to their needs. So yeah, it's a difficult issue, and one that, from an economics
Absolutely.
perspective, I'm not qualified to really speak to. But yeah, that's one of the issues that we really see with it.
That's another expert I'm looking for. I need an economist to come on the show, right? Like
Yeah,
I
well, I mean, good
yeah.
luck. You can find competing economists who have different
It's
opinions on this.
it's It's very true, very true. I mean, I studied ancient history in graduate school, so I don't know anything about modern economic. I mean, I know a little bit as a consumer, but beyond that, I don't know. So the other thing you touched on was there were things that designers can do to incorporate or be more sustainable, promote sustainability. I'm wondering if you could talk about that from the designer standpoint for a minute.
Yeah, so the designer's role is I kind of view it as twofold. So the first is designing in the first place, thinking about that sustainability. So what that's going to mean is thinking about how many cards you're using, like how many different sizes of cards you need. There's all kinds of, I would say, this is very similar in Hollywood, right? A lot of script writers want to be able to have more control of how a movie is directed, and the way that they can do that is by, like tags within the script or scene descriptions within that script that are going to guide the director. This is very similar. You are creating the content. You're the designer. If you show them a prototype that's small, that's in a small box, that has fewer components, all of that stuff is going to guide the initial thoughts for the publisher of what they're going to end up doing with the product layout, the production, all of that kind of stuff. Even if that weren't guiding them, like right now, a lot of publishers really want to have a smaller game because they're a little bit higher. You get higher return on investment. They're easier
Sure.
to sell. People are buying smaller games right now. But even if that weren't the case, you can think about things like, am I using all the cards that fit on a sheet? There are standard sheet sizes, there are standard card sizes. All of those things actually make your game more sustainable using standard box sizes, standard card sizes, all of that. Consistent card sizes, not having like four different sizes of card within a game. Those are things that make it more sustainable too. Having your initial product be basically instead of a bunch of plastic miniatures, having it be, standees or tokens that represent your characters, then that can be another way that you kind of like prime the thinking for the publisher in terms of what they're going to think this product should look like in the end.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, the two challenges that you have, one is how do you use components when you're first designing? But the second one is how do you influence the publisher? There are designers who have the clout to influence the publisher more overtly, who have enough behind their name that they can say, I want this to be, I'm only going to sign this contract if you're going to promise sustainable production. That's a rarer, and probably most designers don't have the comfort level to make that step. And so we don't really pressure designers to do that kind of thing, but they can open that conversation with publishers of, I would love if this game could be, no plastics or mostly sustainable and things like that. And there are publishers who are receptive to that kind of conversation. They might not go with it, and usually publishers don't have to go with anything that the designer specifically wants.
Right. Hmm. So what about I know in my professional world in the archives, digitization is a huge topic and requires more work than people actually realize. You can't just digitize it. However, there's been a lot of talk around tabletop simulator as an alternative to physical prototypes.
Yeah.
I'm what's your
That's
take
actually
on
that's what we do. We do 100% tabletop simulator for our prototyping. Yeah.
Yep. It's
And
hard it's really hard.
it is hard.
As a play tester, I want the prototype, right? And I'm kind of resistant to tabletop
It's
simulator, but
Yeah, and we talk about that all the time.
mhm,
Do My husband does all of his first iterations in Tabletop Simulator, and it's so fast. Like the iteration process is so quick, so easy. You can get up and playing in no time, and so there's such a huge benefit for playtesting at that stage. However, not having things physically in front of you is also a big impediment. It's more finicky. You're more likely to feel like picking up a card and looking at it feels so intuitive when you're at a table, and when you are, having to remember your keybinds and stuff like that for tabletop simulator, it's a very different feel. And so we do find, it does impede playtesting a lot of the time. And then once we actually get our first physical copies, we had something where we have a really cool poker variant game that we're working on now, and we had it online, and you're like, okay, yeah, we'll play test. And then when the moment we got our first physical copy, it was like, what a breath of fresh air to have something you can actually play with. Now we'll, like tape over things on the physical copy
Yeah,
and, write
absolutely.
them on and stuff like that. And that's one of the ways, you don't reprint it every single time you make a
Right.
change.
Absolutely not. So let's the feedback that you get during the playtesting process, right? How much does it change from digital on Tabletop Simulator versus once you get playtesters who have a physical? How much does the feedback, is it more constructive? Is it about the same?
I would say, I don't know that it's specifically the feedback. It's more like how likely are you to have a good how much is there friction in the way of getting accurate feedback, right? Like if you are going to play on Tabletop Simulator, there's all of this friction to, if you have downtime, people are at different computers in different rooms, sometimes in different states or countries when they're playtesting together. And if somebody's doing something, maybe some person like is on their phone. You won't even notice that they're on their phone because they're in a different place. Like when you're at a table, you're not going to be on your phone. What about, if people don't actually understand they have to be reminded about how to search through the deck or something. There's all of these little extra friction steps that make it. I would say it's the same as having a product before there's any UI or user experience design to it, before there's art. People more easily forget what card is which, and they don't have any symbols to base anything off of, and so they don't have the quick intuition. And that's why we try to get symbols and art into our prototypes as fast as possible, because we really believe that you can't get accurate feedback without people having some extra layers on which to understand their
Right.
cards and remember them and what they do. And so I would say it's very similar with tabletop simulators. It just feels like an extra barrier in the way. But that said, we use it all the
Mhm.
time, and it's incredibly important for our process at least.
So, with the use of iconography and glossaries or whatever we call it, legends for the icons, I'm wondering about, is there, or have you noticed, a relationship between designing a language independent game and sustainability? Like, to design
Yes.
a game that's language independent seems like, from my point of view, that it would be more likely to be sustainable.
It is. The
Okay.
the difference, there's a few main things that are
Okay.
gonna contribute to that difference. It's not necessarily a huge difference.
Okay.
So, the first thing is that you'll sometimes buy games where they'll have multiple manuals in the box with different
Yes.
languages. That does contribute to more material, right? And that's pure waste, because that material is you're only usually use one of those languages. We got a box the other day that
And
was
you
had
toss the
six
rest of them.
6 or 7 different manuals in it for all different languages, and I was like, "I've never seen this before." But then they don't have to worry about, they can print a enormous amount of copies at once. That saves them, money, and they can produce massive quantities. They get financial benefits for printing large quantities at a time, and so I understand why people do it. Language independence definitely helps. However, the manual still is always going to be in that
Right.
language. And so
Right.
in a weird way, the ones that are where their components are language independent, but their rules aren't, they're more likely to do that, like print the rules in every language kind of a thing. But the other place where we see language variations be an issue is um, in when you're actually printing, when people actually print, cards and manuals and everything, there are um, there are actual presses that they have to create for each language, for each um, they're called plates, printing plates. They have to create for every single language for every edition of the game. And so, we have plates that are for the English language version of Mantis Falls. And they can reuse those. They made them once, they can reuse them every time, as long as we don't change anything about what's on it, right? So as long as we keep everything consistent, no new plates, which is wonderful. But every time we change language, they have to change the plates. They have to create new plates for every new language. If we switch to a different manufacturer, we have to create all new plates. And so that plate creation is, a part of that waste process, because those plates get stored away, but eventually they'll, you know, no
Yeah.
longer be used sometime in the
Yeah.
future when people don't buy this game anymore. And that's, I would say it's a small amount of waste though, compared to what we're seeing in, you know, large plastic miniatures and,
Right.
oversized boxes and that kind of stuff.
Has there been any conversations, either with the committee that you're on with Gamma or any other efforts that you're working on, has there been any other conversations about foregoing including rule books altogether in favor of a QR code or some other link to a digital or mobile version of the rule book?
Yeah, I haven't heard those conversations within the Gamma Sustainability Committee nor the Green Games Guide. Those might have happened when I wasn't there. I haven't been on the Green Game Guide Green Games Guide for very long. But I have had those conversations with my husband, and we have unanimously agreed that people would hate that. One of the great things about a game is that you can take it and bring it to a place off grid. You don't need your phones. When you do pull out phones, people tend to get distracted by other things. And so there's this kind of beauty and um the fact that people could actually just like throw their phone out a window for a little while, open this thing, and then just, learn an analog way. And again, I mean, the rule book itself, the paper is so small on the scale of waste that we're thinking about. Like, the amount of junk mail that you get in the mail is going to be more than that paper. That's not usually where I'm most worried about the impact that we're making. And also, those are some of the most recycled components is, paper, boxes, cards. People are better about handling paper than almost any other material out there. It's where we can start making really serious changes to either the quality of the paper, the sourcing for the paper, and then the other components, really, like how many plastic bags do you really need in your game to store stuff? How
The
many?
answer is 0. I
Zero.
don't need
Yes, it is.
any.
You do not need plastic bags
No,
to store things.
we've
Yeah.
been gaming for 30 years. I have an entire shelf of bags above my
hmm
head. I don't need any more.
And what we're generally seeing too is there's a funny thing. Like I think it's this. We didn't know how much consumers actually wanted this stuff. So Atlas Games that makes Gloom, they're one of their biggest. So they have a sort of supplementary business called Replay Workshop, in which they take the old sprues from, pop out plastic miniatures and recycle them into components, terrains, all kinds of stuff like that. And they are trying to collect sprues from, for example, local retailers. And so we set up
Okay.
this program with one of the retailers that's on the sustainability committee, Total Escape Games in Colorado. And Jason set up this sprue recycling thing. And the moment that he got it out there, the amount of people who had been hoarding their sprues in their home and being like, someday someone's going to figure out what to do with this. And then, they open this and then instantly it was full. All of these people had been waiting for this solution without even really telling anyone about it, without even like talking about it, because they felt guilty about throwing this stuff in the trash. And as we should be figuring out better things to do with them. But I think we're learning that customers want this. They want solutions. They don't want to feel like they're being wasteful when they buy games.
Right. So where is the number one pain point, if you can call it that,
Yeah.
for everything we're talking about? Like the one thing,
Plastics.
plastics.
Plastics. Getting plastics out of games. Yeah. So what that generally I can tell you the kind of easiest ways. So plastic bags, getting plastic bags out of there. The actual like true best, easiest is the plastic wrapping that comes around cards, that cellophane wrap that comes around cards. People hate tearing that off. They don't want to
Hate it.
feel their fingernails go against the cards. Sometimes it doesn't come off easily, and then they worry that they're going to damage the cards. And um, almost all of the manufacturers that I have spoken to have the capacity to either do paper bands or full paper wrap, like a gift wrap type thing of the cards. And generally speaking, it's the same price for us as publishers. Yeah. And this is
Really?
and this is one of the things where like when we did this, we transitioned our cards from plastic wrapped to paper wrapped. It's been great. People like unwrapping those so much. It's more like opening a gift, right? It comes off nice and easy and then you get to recycle it and it just feels better overall. And it looks really nice too.
It does. It's so
Yeah.
much cleaner. Yeah.
Yeah. So we know that this is a viable solution. It's a reasonably priced solution, and all these places have the facility to do this. So why aren't we doing this all the time? The games are already protected. They usually have plastic wrap on the outside, and that's one of the few places where we're still trying to understand like we want to get people away from plastic wrapping the outside, but it does become an issue of, are we risking damage to the whole game, which is waste in a different direction, right? So, but on the inside, those cards don't need to be plastic wrapped. So that's one we're trying to get people to push towards. There's actually a new initiative also that's coming out of Europe starting at the end of next year, or the end of this year for bigger companies and the end of next year for smaller companies, that people are going to have to start getting prove that their paper products are free of deforestation. So they're using responsible, sustainable forestry services where they're replacing trees that get milled. It's called the European Union Deforestation Regulation, and they're changing
Interesting.
the laws very shortly. And so all companies that are exporting into the EU, or bringing games into the EU, are going to have to start complying with this. So you're going to see the industry start to move towards FSC paper across the board very shortly.
Mm,
And not necessarily because everyone's choosing to, it's just because they have to. So that one's a nice easy win for us, because the European Union's taking the lead on that and is just basically making people do it. But the places where we can really make the biggest changes are getting out plastics,
plastics.
in every form we can find them, basically.
So, are there any new or upcoming materials or innovations in packaging that you're particularly excited about that you're hoping will become more and more
Yeah.
accessible?
Some of the things that we're talking about, CGE started using rewood, which is a composite of sawdust and plastic that, while it itself, like if you were to put it into a waste stream, I'm not entirely sure how each different waste stream would actually treat that, or because there is plastic inside, but they are claiming at least that it's infinitely recyclable into new components. And that's when where you can actually do molded miniatures and things like that. It certainly is, and I actually have a, like, literally right next door. So we actually just got this for an upcoming talk that I'm doing, but you'll hear the clacking around. But it's basically about 70% sawdust, with a binder
Okay.
material, and it's truly just like moldable into miniatures, which is a solution that we need because miniatures aren't going to be going away anytime soon.
No.
Too much of a demand for them. So if we could find a way, it smells like a campfire. It's very nice. If we could find a way to at least make them less plastic consuming and an offshoot of a waste product, which is the sawdust, then
Mhm.
that's wonderful. And that's certainly a positive direction for us to be going. The company that makes that is Kistner in Germany. And they were very gracious to send me this sample pack to be able to show off at the upcoming Tabletop Game Association Expo. So that one's an interesting solution. We're looking at gift wrapping machines, which would basically hopefully replace the plastic wrap that goes around games. Your games would have a layer of paper on the outside that would be the protected layer that would probably have some printing. It would feel more like, opening a present. I've talked with Jamie Stegmeyer. He's working with Panda on that. We're talking with some of our manufacturing partners within the Green Games Guide about the feasibility. It's not a commonly purchased or owned piece of equipment for game manufacturers right now, but that's potentially where we see some options for the future, for sustainable box closures, because right now we're having a kind of a mixed issue of the plastic wrap's very protective,
Right.
but it's not sustainable. The tabs, the plastic or paper tabs that go around the games, for one, sometimes they peel up, sometimes they take off portions of the box, and customers pretty unanimously do not like them. And sometimes retailers don't either. Sometimes some of our retailer members will complain that the tabs are coming off of games in the store, which looks very bad for them.
Yeah.
I've been to, like, Barnes and Noble, and I'll see ones that have tabs on them, and the box will be open and people will have, like, rifled through the materials inside, and
Yes.
that's not a sellable game any longer. Um, so we're trying to come up with some good solutions for the exterior. That's been a little bit of our lower priority because there are so many easier targets to look at for sustainability right
Right.
now.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about the actual committee's role in everything we've just talked about? Like
Yeah.
what, because I'm pretty sure I don't know a lot about the committee at all. I don't know
hmm
what it is that you do and how can you affect change
Yeah.
across the
So
industry?
so the first thing to say is that Tabletop Game Association, which we call GAMA, is a industry group with membership, including, designers, media, publishers, events runners, everybody within the industry that's working in tabletop games has a place within that organization. It's one of the most reasonable, honestly, one of the most reasonable trade organizations I've ever seen. It's like $300 a year for membership, and that also gets you access to their annual meetings. That would be so Origins would be one of them, and Gamma Expo, which is coming up in about a
Yep.
week and a half, is the other.
Yeah.
Pretty reasonable within that structure of that organization. There are a lot of volunteers like myself, the people who are members of the board, who are trying to support the industry with all kinds of initiatives. These would be things like when the tariffs were going up, there was lobbying groups. When we were trying to figure out how to get games into schools, there's an education committee that's trying to help get educational games into schools for children at a young age to begin playing games instead of watching TV all the
Right.
time,
Right. Yeah,
or
absolutely.
going around social media. And so we're finding all these avenues where an organization like that can support not just the game industry, but the game players better. And so within that structure, there are committees, and these are usually kind of subordinate to the main goals of the
Sure.
organization. So there's also board members and everything, but the committees will cover things like um, making sure that we have appropriate DEI initiatives to support an expansion of the industry to be inclusive of all members. There's one committee that's a DEI committee. There's like ethics in media, making sure that people are, people like yourself or anybody else who's, maybe reviewing games or talking about games, that they're doing it in an ethical way. And so there's all these different committees that are focused on important topics within the industry. So sustainability was a relatively new one, and it was initiated by Eric Price, who was at the time the president of Gamma. And he was how I found this and got into it.
Okay.
And so I took over the role from him. But our structure, we have members from several different groups within Gamma. So that means we have manufacturers who are members of that committee, which is
Okay.
very impressive because they're of all the groups, they are probably the most likely to be competitive with each other. Like, you're only going to go to one manufacturer usually, and
Right.
so they usually don't want to share their trade secrets with each other. But these particular members of our committee are very much focused on the long game, which I appreciate. They understand that this all needs to change. We have publisher members, we have retail members, we have some people who kind of cross over into events and all that. But right now we have basically three work groups. We have the manufacturers who are hard at work helping to figure out how to educate publishers about what is possible, what materials can be used and should be
Okay.
used,
Okay.
and also inform the upcoming criteria for the Green Games Guide, which is working on a possible certification seal, so that a person could flip over a game and say, "Oh, this is a sustainable game because it has this seal on it." And then what does that actually mean? What's financially feasible for someone to make a game sustainable? Because we can go in a lot of directions of what's scientifically sustainable, but then what's actually going to
Sure.
be possible, right? So our manufacturers are working on things like that. Our publishers are working on what kind of things should we be asking manufacturers, and then on the other side, what kinds of things should we be telling our customers about the materials that are in this game? Like, what's our
Okay.
responsibility to tell them this is recyclable, compostable, this is this type of material, so you understand how to handle it at its end of life. We have a retailer that we're working with. Total Escape Games is working with us on a display of sustainable and award-winning games, and we're trying to understand how we can incentivize customers to see sustainable games and not just think like, "Oh, this is, good for the environment." That's, like, I think people go into a different, less playful mindset when they see sustainability. They're, like, reminded of the real world and the sadnesses that exist there.
Sure.
And so we want people to see sustainable and be excited to buy that game. And so what does that look like? For us, that meant reaching out to Matt Leacock, Elizabeth Hargrave, and getting quotes from them about why they um, insist on making sustainable games, what
Right.
their goals are, so that they can basically be the direct connection to the customer and say, like, Elizabeth Hargrave says this about sustainability. This is what she believes. This is what she wants you to know.
Right.
And then we're working with a different retailer as a control group to that so that we can get actual data driven analysis of how games sell when they're marketed as award winning and sustainable, so that we can pitch that to both other retailers to have a display like that and to other publishers so that they're more willing to make those kinds of changes to their game. So we have a whole bunch of fronts that we're working on at the same time within the committee, but it's been great, and we have some amazing members and collaborators with this.
So let's get down to where the rubber meets the road, right?
Hmm.
Let's talk about the gamers, the consumers, those of us who purchase the games and play the games, right?
Hmm.
What can an everyday gamer do to support
Yeah.
is the word I was looking for, guys. What can we do to support sustainability? God, that's
Hmm.
why I tremble. All that O's S's in
Yeah.
the hobby.
Yes. So a few different things. Some of them are easier changes to make than others. So one of the easiest changes that you can make that's, easy depending on you as a person, be okay with errors. If something is slightly bent, torn, misshapen, misprinted, if you lose a piece or like, be willing to replace that with something that you have at home, be willing to make do with something being a little off. Asking for replacements, having to buy whole new games, having to ship stuff all over the world. Gamers tend to be a group that really like things just so. They like things to be perfect, and it's that collector mindset. However, that mindset comes at a cost. It
It
means
does.
that publishers, when they make a game where there's like a little dent to the box, they might toss that game. They might never let it see market because they know the retailer's not going to want to pick it up. The consumer's not going to pick it up. And that's a huge waste stream already. Or, we get emails all the time from people who say, I broke off this tiny portion of this one wooden meeple. I live in the UK or Syria. We've had ones from Syria. They'll be
Right?
like, "Can you ship us a new meeple?" And I'm like, the cost and the lack of sustainability of doing something like that. Like something like that, you could get some wood glue, you could put it back together. And that's still our responsibility as a business to support our customers no matter what. But I would implore those customers to be willing to see the uniqueness and originality in something that's not quite perfect. The second thing I would say, treat your games very well. Make sure that they're not going to get damaged. They're off the floor. You don't have to worry about floods, humidity, all of that kind of stuff. The longer it can last, the better. So that's the one of the best things that you can do. But also understand all of those games are going to be waste someday. Like think about the amount of games that you have that are 100 years old.
Mhm.
In 100
Yeah.
years, nobody is probably going to own the games that are on your shelf.
Right.
The
Right.
plastics will have gotten brittle. The printing may have faded.
Huh?
This printing is not necessarily meant to last over 100 years. And, when you print with archival inks, maybe you could do that. But
Yep.
these
Yep.
games, they will be waste. And so own that. Appreciate that that's true. And think about when you discard an old game, what are the correct places for that to go? Think
Oh, yeah.
about looking for or asking for more sustainability in your games. So reach out to publishers, talk to them on their online channels and ask them to make more sustainable changes. If you demand it, they will do it. They will have to. What that generally looks like for you is reduce plastics in games. It means FSE or, sustainably sourced paper. But it also means that certain types of finishes are just out. Any of the like UV spot stuff that you see where like if you turn from the right angle, you can see the title of the game that's in like, a shinier font. That makes the whole box unrecyclable, unfortunately. That is a rough one. I know, and it looks so beautiful.
It does.
Foil is better. Foil actually does come off during the recycling process, and it's not a large portion of that waste. And so it's still not perfect, but it is far better. Soy-based inks, you wouldn't necessarily know this. Soy or vegetable-based inks, you wouldn't know this by looking at a game, but you can talk to these publishers on their channels, ask these questions, and the more you ask, the more they're forced to answer, the more they're going to make these changes.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be an aggressive thing. You don't have to like slam them for not being sustainable. People are making steps as they can and as the demand exists. So really, really, it's create the pressure from the source. You are the source of their business. If you put on the pressure and ask them to be more sustainable, they will, because
Yep.
they'll have no choice.
It's interesting. I was just thinking about how so much you were saying really relates to my professional world, probably more than any episode that I've done over the past 4 years, right? So one of the things that we do at work is that we recommend to, all of our offices is that you keep all of your records, whether that's paper records or a server, if you have a local server, anything that's going to hold data, a minimum of 6 inches off the ground. Right
Mhm.
now,
Yep.
it doesn't do very good for locations like from where I'm originally from in Louisiana, where you're going to have a hurricane and a flood.
Mhm.
Which, speaking of, everyone knows this story. The flood is what brought me to Illinois. So 6 inches may not help, but if you have a pipe burst
Mhm.
or some sort of a plumbing leak, you can avoid mold and so many other factors that will break down your games
Mhm.
or anything in your house.
Yeah, I
Just,
mean, really, it's all about
mm,
at that point, right? It's about everything, right? You don't wanna waste anything if you can help it.
it
We
really
had a flood
is.
we had a flood here, a few months ago. We're in North Carolina right now, and we had the the torrential rain that came to North Carolina.
Yes.
So I'm in
Yeah.
Chapel Hill, and we had about 6 inches, and,
Ugh,
some of our games were saved, like the ones that were closer to the floor were saved by the fact that they had plastic wrap on them. That's one we
right.
haven't gotten rid of yet. We have paper on the inside, but we've been a little bit hesitant. And even within the Green Games Guide, even within, we've been talking about it as a one of the tougher issues to solve is what's on the exterior of the game to protect it. Because it's not just that, it's humidity, it's what about them rubbing
Yes.
against each other.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of types of damage that you can get
Yeah.
when you don't have a
Yes.
protective layer on the exterior. So
That
some
is.
of ours were
Yep.
saved, and then but a lot of our stuff, we had spare parts that got completely destroyed.
Mm.
And we really worked to, like, gosh, we have some fabrics in the game that we, like, put through the washing machine to see if we could salvage them. But they're natural fabrics, they're cotton, so they all shrunk. And so I was like, well, shoot,
No.
we're not gonna be able to salvage those ones.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
we tried very hard.
People tend to forget, yes, okay, there's if you have a flood or some sort of a leak and your floor gets wet, yes, that water, but you said it yourself, humidity. Humidity is moisture. Moisture is water. Guys, this stuff messes with everything. And
Yeah.
to your point about plastics, think about all your Legos that got discolored over
Mhm.
time. All of this is impermanent. None of
Yeah.
it is meant to
Well, and
last.
plastics, there's a sort of tangential ideology that's like, why don't we just make our games out of stone or plastic or whatever is going to last the longest, right? Like the longer it can last, the better. But I mean, think about all those, like, you know, door plastic play toys that you had when you were a kid. Those, they discolor, they become brittle, and that's because plasticizer chemicals are added to those plastics in order to keep them supple. They actually have to have some elastic quality and not just fall apart
Yes,
with pressure. And so when we add plasticizers, they eventually do evaporate into the atmosphere, which is its own problem. But now you have a product that's going to break down easier, and you're going to want to replace that. You're going to want it to not look like that. So
exactly.
I like to think about it as, if you go to a great meal, a fancy meal, you're getting like a filet mignon or something like that. You enjoy the heck out of that meal. You don't wanna waste a single bit of it, but you also understand that it is impermanent, you know, that it is going back to the earth one day, and it's the same with
Exactly.
everything.
Exactly. So the Green Games Guide, once the second edition is finalized and is published, who will have access to it?
Everybody. So the
Okay.
current edition of the Green Games Guide is online. I think
Okay.
it's greengamesguide.com.
Okay.
It's a excellent, beautifully designed PDF that is not only technical, but very visually endearing. They did a great job on that first edition of making it an approachable, enjoyable document. And the second one, when it goes public, it will be online. It's available to anybody who wants to look at it. And it is going to cover, for those of you who are interested, who are consumers, who are interested in what the production looks like. it does give a little bit of a extra glimpse into what are designers thinking about? What are publishers thinking about? What are we doing with all like when we make a game, when you crowdfund a game and then you're like, and then a year and a half later, I get it. Uh, what does all that time include? What are you spending that time on? It's a little bit of a glimpse into the world of a designer and a publisher, but it all is also customer facing. So it does have for every section it says what can customers do.
That was gonna be
Yeah.
my follow-up question is, will it contain guidance for things and behaviors that we can change to support sustainability, best practices on preserving and maintaining our collections, things of
Yeah.
that nature? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other I mentioned before that demanding different materials of your publishers, or putting pressure on them. I would say one of the other big things that you can do as a gamer is be willing to have a smaller box game that costs more. Like if you could take Splendor, I think is the classic example of this. If you could take
Okay.
Splendor and fit it into a much, much smaller box, then great, right? You pay the same amount for that game because it's all the same materials, but it has a way lower footprint overall because now we're not shipping giant containers of, a quarter as many games all around the world. And we're not creating as much box. And
Right.
so the publisher won't necessarily make that box smaller because they know that if they make a small box and then they charge more for it or charge the same amount as a big box, you're less likely to buy it. And so look for density in your boxes. When you find games that are dense, appreciate them and appreciate the publishers for doing that. And when you find games that are not dense, point it out. Tell the
Hmm.
publisher that they need to make it a little bit more dense, that they need to be better about not just filling the whole box with air. It's going to be better for your shelf. You're going
Yeah.
to be able to keep more games. It's going to be
Yes.
better for the environment. It's a win for everybody.
I think a perfect example of that, applying that pressure and making positive change, I'm thinking about Flip 7 by the Op.
Hmm.
The original, it came in a huge box, but it
Yeah.
was much bigger than it
And they
needed to
switched it. They switched
be.
it to that little
They
simple tuck
did.
box. Yeah.
Yes, they did, and
Very
then Flip
tight.
7, we just got Flip 7 with a vengeance from Walmart this weekend, and it's packed properly,
Hmm.
sustainably. If
Yes.
you're listening, the Op, I did not mean that. I meant sustainably.
Properly. Yeah. Pat Marino's going to hear that one.
But you know what's interesting is when we were, playing we played both games yesterday with our group. We were thinking about sustainability immediately. We were like, if we get rid of that insert in the larger Flip 7 box, we can keep Flip 7 in it, and we can take Flip 7 with a vengeance and just put it in there.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm still using the box. I'm still
Hmm.
using both
Yeah.
boxes
Well, and that's
and
one of the things that
storing
I
them.
really like about what actually Stonemaier does. So Jamie does all, I think, hopefully I'm quoting this correctly, but I think Jamie does all expansions for games in much, much tighter and more sustainable packaging that's much more recyclable also. It's and the actual box is a very clearly not a keepsake box, right? Like it's just like a little like tuck literature mailer kind of a deal because he knows you're going to take that stuff and put it into your full box. And so there's room in the full box for the expansions, which is another thing that's a little bit of a like, uh, it's good and it's bad, right? Like you don't want to just have empty air in the box for no reason, but at the same time you want to be able to support people putting an expansion in. But he knows that there's people who are going to put that expansion in, and so he makes sure that the expansion box is intended for recycling. And that's something that I really appreciate. It doesn't have lots of extra printing on the outside. It doesn't have lots of layers of inks and everything like that. And you'll see that when you look at expansions in the store. Yeah, having space for people to be able to include sleeves if they're going to include sleeves. Now sleeves have their own issues, but if they're going to include sleeves, that they have space for it. If they're going to include it, expansions, that's totally understandable. That does not mean that you're irresponsibly adding tons of air. You'll know the people who are adding tons of
Right?
air for no reason,
Oh,
just to
yeah.
make their box bigger. You'll see them.
That's right. So my last question is there either a game or a publishing company or anything like that, a perfect example of this is a game that it executes on all levels and is completely sustainable? Maybe not 100%,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
you're
I
like,
get you.
"This game is perfect," or "This
So, I mean,
company."
I'm not gonna do justice to all the people who have done this because
Sure, I
there
understand.
are so the problem is there are tons of people who have made incredibly sustainable games that didn't get as much attention or get as much, visibility as the ones that are like, award winners or big euros and things like
Sure.
that, right? So the ones that I'm high level aware of are some of the ones who have been award winning and also have won the sustainability award. So Green Games Guide votes every year on a sustainability award.
Okay.
So the three that always come to mind, the two who won the last 2 years of sustainability awards. So Earthworn Rangers um, is um, won the first sustainability award, and that is a very highly sustainable game. They even did regional manufacturing. I mean, just and actually Andrew Navarro, who created that game, is on this committee with me, and he's one of our most diligent members, which I love. And his American manufacturer Nick Haas is from Delano Games is also on the committee with me. So those are folks who I know care a lot about sustainability because they put in a lot of volunteer hours outside of just even the stuff that makes the money on this front. So that's amazing. Then there is Endeavor Deep Sea was the winner this year for
Okay.
sustainability. They did their inserts are made out of like a pressed bagasse, like a waste product from sugarcane pulp manufacturing. And so and did like I think initially did biodegradable bags, but biodegradable bags can sometimes break down over time. That was one that both Helena from Burnt Island and then also Jamie Stegmeyer both said that they moved away from those, and just because they do tear apart very easily. They're not a long-term product, and that's it's not just about the footprint. It's about making sure it's something that's actually going to serve the product
Yep.
properly. So
Yep.
it's good that we're figuring those things out. And then the other one that I would say is CMYK made Daybreak, and that's another great example where I believe Matt Leacock made a pressed for sustainable production, and that was a beautiful sustainable game. And I would say, in general, my feeling, and this is what something Andrew and I have talked about a lot, what we would really like to see is that the sustainable games are not just the ones that are about environmentalism. Like our game's about the mob, it's not at all sustainability. Earthworn Rangers is not particularly about sustainability either. What we generally see is a lot of people make very sustainable decisions for games that are about sustainability
Right.
because they know that the people who are interested in those topics, who are buying those games, are also interested in sustainability.
Right.
But what I want to see is people making those decisions regardless of the theme of the game. Um,
Okay. That's great. That's that's good. So making a game that's good for the environment, even though the game has nothing to do
yes. Yeah, where you don't
playing.
get to have the audience pat you on the back for the fact that you made it sustainable and
Yes.
everything. You're
Yeah.
doing it because it's the right thing to do.
So my
Yeah.
last question, there is no wrong answer. Let's talk about the board game insert industry.
Okay. Yeah.
There are
Game trays
lots
and
of
such.
there are lots of options. I was thinking folded space, but okay,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So the aftermarket insert industry is the thought.
Okay, okay, yes, yes, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so you have a preference. And not saying, "Oh, I like folded space over," but you have a preference, like, because folded space uses foam, and
Mhm.
then you got several that do wood, right? Game trays uses
Yeah.
plastic. What are your
I'm
thoughts?
I understand that people really like the, like, efficiency and organizational structure. We have family members who get really into the, like, 3D printing the inserts and everything. So you've perfect organization. I personally am willing to sacrifice perfect organization to not have extra stuff. So personally, like, my own preference, I would never go for any organization structure at all, regardless of what it's made out of, because I already have whatever the manufacturer provided, and I'm just going to make do with whatever that is instead of owning more stuff. But if I were to make a recommendation, I would say wood, paper, those are going to be your better materials across the board. Even the like what we call like bioplastics or something like corn based plastic or the pressed bagasse, that kind of thing. probably are less great for the environment in the long run, than the wood. And for some reasons that are unfortunate. And one common thing that happens is, and this is when I worked in a different industry, when I worked in the coffee industry, we were always moving towards compostables and all of that, and that included plant-based plastics. One of the problems is that people tend to recycle plant-based plastics, and they can't be recycled, and they mess with the recycling system. They reduce the efficiency of plastic recycling, and now you've got a different weird problem of people putting something that's meant to be composted into something that's recyclable. It
Yeah.
screws it. It's a human behavior issue, right? A user experience issue, but it does screw up with the systems that we have in place. So I would say people know how to handle wood and they know how to handle paper. And so that's a really reliable way to store stuff. I love when people do paper inserts, just folded cardboard or folded paper. That's a really low tech, and I know people like their fancy inserts and everything, but it's a standby and it's reliable for a reason.
Hmm. Yep.
You're gonna know exactly how to take care of that at the end of its life.
True. So the number one obstacle that is preventing us from going to a zero carbon footprint to being 100% sustainable is us.
It is, yeah. I mean,
We're the
anything you're
problem, guys.
producing, the moment you produce a thing, it's not going to be zero, right? We technically pay offsets, and by the way, the vast majority, I can't say, like, I'm not a perfect scientist on this, but the vast majority of like carbon neutral carbon offsets are a complete scam. Anything that's saying they're planting trees or they're saving forests or anything like that, you run away from those. Those are scams.
Yeah.
Our We do pay carbon offsets. We pay, I want to say, approximately 50 cents per game, something along those lines. And what that goes towards is solar stoves for developing nations. So places where they
Okay.
would normally burn biomass in order to cook at home. It does a couple of things. It means we're not burning a bunch of stuff to put into the atmosphere, but it also means that people in low income areas who couldn't possibly afford to make that transition are now not only getting something like solar stoves to be able to improve their footprint, but they are also inhaling less pollution in their own
Hmm.
homes, which is better
Yep.
for, usually the environmentally sustainable solution is also the one that is good for people, that's ethical for citizens of a nation. And so we do that, and we've fund some plastic cleanups from beaches and things like that. That's what our money for carbon neutrality goes towards. And as far as I can tell, of all of the rating schemes that they have out there for what counts as good carbon offsetting, that's one of the best. But we've also, as an industry, we've very thoroughly understood that just being like, I'm going to make a bunch of plastic and then I'm going to pay some offsets for it is not the way to go. That does not actually help us. So that's why we're also making material changes in our games.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your expertise and sharing and visiting with me for an hour. I appreciate it.
Thank you, PJ. This
If
is having a platform to be able to tell people about sustainability is the only way anything ever gets done.
it's true, it's true. It's our community and we have to clean it up. So if anyone has any other questions like for you about sustainability efforts, gamma, publishing, designing of game, any questions at all, where could they find you on all the
I
platforms?
All the platforms. Oof. Okay, so if you email me, info@distantrabbitgames.com, that's probably the easiest way to reach me. If you find Distant Rabbit Games on Instagram, Blue Sky, gosh, what else are we on? We're on probably pretty much everything. I've deleted TikTok, so sorry, you won't be able to reach me on TikTok. But
Okay.
we Board Game Geek. Gosh, there's so many platforms. We have a Discord for our game company, for our first title. Find me on there. But you can also reach out to the game manufacturer. Or it used to be, we just went through a transition. It used to be the Game Manufacturers Association. It's now called the Tabletop Game Association. If you want to reach out
Oh,
there, they can direct you
so
to.
it's not gamma anymore.
It still is
It's
Gamma. It's still the
okay.
acronym is still Gamma, but that's you know Game Association, basically Tabletop Game Association,
Okay.
because it used to be all manufacturers of games. That's why it was called the Game Manufacturers Association. But now
Okay.
there's media, there's
Right.
retailers, there's everything. So,
Right.
but yeah, if you can reach out to them, they'll be able to put you in contact with committees. Yeah. Anywhere you see Distant Rabbit Games, I'm gonna be the one that's answering that message or that email.
Okay.
So yeah, reach me on any of them.
Distant Rabbit Games, guys.
Yes,
Check them
Distant
out.
Rabbit.
Julie will respond. Thank you for watching, guys. As always, please like and subscribe, comment below. Share your thoughts in the comments of games that you think are really good at displaying sustainability in their materials. And we'll reach out and reply to you right away. So, as always, be kind to one another. Let's treat our planet well and play more games.